got frostbite and lost my feet. Yeah. That was in December. Actually, I guess really January, but it really started in December. So what happened is my kidneys started to fail, right? So my face was swelling up like crazy. I can show you some pictures. I don't even look like myself. And I went to the hospital for it because everybody down there was like, even the cops, man, the cops walked up to me the one day, they're like, "You butt?" I was like, "Yeah." "Why?" And they're like, "People are worried about you. Like the people on the cameras are watching, like they think you're gonna die. Your mom's looking for you." I guess word had gotten around.
Because they have cameras in Philly. So I know where he was and I'd look at the cameras. And then when I talked to him, he'd look at the camera knowing that I was watching him. Of course, we went down and they were bad. It was bad. It was bad.
You're not supposed to be here.
But if he didn't lose his legs, he would not be with us right now. He was so full of infection. He wouldn't have made it. He had been gone. He'd been gone months ago. There was just no way his body was done. His mind wasn't done, but his body was done. His body could not take any more.
They asked me to go to the hospital. I said, "No, I'm not going. It even went so far as a cop actually offered me money. He's like, "Do you need money to get well or something so that you'll go?" I was like, "I appreciate the offer, but no." And that went on for a couple of weeks. It got to the point where I couldn't even open my eyes. I had to pry my eyes open to see. They were so swollen shut from my body retaining water, which I found out shortly after when I went to the hospital is called xylazine-induced nephrotic syndrome. So nephrotic syndrome is a kidney disease where your body doesn't process proteins in the proper way. It causes water retention and it essentially is poisoning your body. You can't process toxins. So I went to the hospital eventually because they didn't give up on it. Every time they saw me, "You ready to go yet? You ready to go yet?" So eventually I said yes. And while I was in the hospital, this was in December, right before Christmas, I went to the hospital and my face started to swell up even more so while in the hospital. I don't know why, if it was maybe just a reaction to no longer being in stress, like my body was overcompensating or something, just being out of the cold. And they had to trach me. So I have a trach wound on my neck here. You see that?
And what is that process?
That's a tracheostomy. What they do is essentially put a plastic tube in your neck so you can breathe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because your throat had swollen up so much that no air was coming out, right?
Yeah, my throat was swole shut. So they did that. I woke up 4 days later from a medically induced coma. I didn't even know any time had passed. I woke up, I couldn't talk, I was thirsty. Can't have water because you essentially have to learn how to swallow again. Mm-hmm. So, I'm like, I'm thirsty, I couldn't talk. And they're like, you can't have anything. They gave me a sponge, sponge with some water dipped on it. And I could only have that every couple of hours.
Jeez.
Yeah, it was rough. I was sick when I woke up because they were giving me the bare minimum. So I told them I need meds. I asked them to call my mom. I could be I don't want to say that I'm a jerk in the hospital. I can just be demanding, I guess. I'm not rude, but, I tell them this is your job. You gotta, I'm sick, man. Give me stuff.
Totally. It's understandable in the position that you were in.
Exactly. It's the mindset, really. It's where you're at. I had them call my mom. I told her that I want to leave. I was writing on a pad, and they were reading it off to her. And that went on for a couple of days. She came down to visit me. Actually, she took some time off work, came down to visit me.
The doctors called me because they had to do a blood transfusion. They had to ask my permission because he was in a medically induced coma for 4 days, which he doesn't remember, but of course he doesn't. And they had to call me for permission. So of course, then I went down for that.
From there, when she had to go, I decided I did as well. And when she left, I went back out to the streets and I had a trach in my throat. I told the doctor I want to leave. He's like, "Are you serious, man?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm serious." He's like, "You're going to die." And I told him I'll be fine. But I signed the AMA papers against medical advice and left.
We had to go home. Donna had work, I had work. And we weren't even out of Philly when he left the hospital.
Honestly, I could hardly even walk, and like my brain was in like such a fog at that time. It actually took me like 5 hours to get from Temple Hospital down to Kensington. I kept getting turned around and like confused. That's like a symptom with the tranq, is like confusion. You know, you just don't know what's going on really. Eventually I made it back down there. You know, everybody on the street was like, "What are you doing, dude? Like, are you trying to kill yourself?" So I'm not really trying to live, you know? And I think that stress on my body from that whole situation is what really pushed it over the edge, because I was weak to the point after being out there with the trach in, that it started to get infected. I was injecting in my neck, and to do that you have to blow, but I couldn't blow because I had this hole in my neck. So I was like missing shots. So then the trach itself was infected. I had abscesses all over my neck. I would like almost pass out just standing up. I'd be totally winded crossing the street. And I was sleeping next to my girlfriend the one night. It was bitter cold. And I woke up in the morning and my feet were uncovered from the blankets that we had. So I think they got uncovered while I was asleep somehow. And the next night we stayed in the shelter, and I didn't really notice anything, you know, the day after. But when we stayed in the shelter, I took my shoes off. I tried to put them back on in the morning. They wouldn't fit in my shoes. So they had like ballooned overnight from the frostbite damage. I didn't even realize I had it yet. But when I tried to stand up, I really couldn't. We got on a bus to leave, and they were taking us back to a train stop. It took me 2 hours to go 100 yards. And, you know, I had to lean all my weight on Brittany to even cross the street. I was just in rough shape. And I stayed out on the street for another day, and I went to the hospital. I flagged some cops down, and I said, "Look, guys, I need some help." You know, I said, my trach's infected badly. There's something wrong with my feet. Like, can you call an ambulance for me? And they were actually like, "Well, didn't we just try to get you into the hospital and you didn't want to go?" And I'm like, "Look, man, like, yeah, but that doesn't matter. Like, I'm asking you now." So the one cop, he shined his flashlight at my neck, and he was like, "Oh my God," he said, that's bad. He said, "I'm calling, man." You know, he told his partner that he's calling. The ambulance came. I couldn't walk. When I got to the hospital, they took a look at my neck, and I told them, you know, I think there's something wrong with my feet too. And when they took my shoes off, and they took my socks off, and my socks were actually like stuck to my skin. And when they took it off, the nurse just was like, "Oh my God." I was like, "What?" You know, and I looked down, and my feet were gigantic, covered in blisters. The skin was like dark purple, bruised, and just, you know, destroyed from the frostbite. I didn't even really know that I had it until that moment. I knew something was wrong, but not how bad. And she's like, "You're gonna lose your feet." And, you know, I could just think like I hope not, you know, like that's it.